I'm joined here with RJ Toledo. He's a former FBI agent. Now, we're going to go through a couple things here, some questions that we'd love to get answered in regards to the Gabby Petito Brian Laundrie case. And right now, to start off, we want to break down the difference between a person of interest and a suspect. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, that's a pretty common question. A person of interest is not exactly a legal definition to describe how a person's status is in the investigation. It's just kind of a term used to describe somebody who may know something about what's going on in the case, and law enforcement wants to reach out to them and ask them questions and see what they know. A suspect then is now you're going into legal territory, and that's when you're seen as actually being linked to the crime somehow. Probable cause exists to link you to the crime. Arrest warrant could be issued or is imminent. And at that point, you have other legal requirements to fulfill, like, for example, reading them the Miranda rights before questioning and other things.
And with this, for a person of interest particularly, everyone is asking, why wasn't Brian Laundrie brought in for questioning sooner? Why wasn't he arrested? Can you answer that?
Well, if they're at the stage where nobody had reported a crime yet, then law enforcement will really have no reason to suspect that one had occurred. So once Gabby was reported missing, law enforcement can't really jump to arrest the last person that was with her. They have to look for the evidence. They have to see if they can find her. And they have to basically build any probable cause to see who is going to be linked to the crime. So the investigation really has to be allowed to unfold and see where the evidence, because that's really the important part, is where the evidence is leading them.
And with this, people are also wanting to know too, could Brian Laundrie have been arrested for stealing Gabby Petito's van when he returned from that trip without her?
Right. So you have to think about the fact that if nobody had reported the van stolen and he had regular access to the van before, that there possibly could have been many other reasons why he had the van and Gabby wasn't with him, why Gabby wasn't there, why Gabby was somewhere else. Unless somebody had reported a crime had occurred, you just can't really jump to that conclusion yet. You have to see what evidence is there and then take your steps.
Does law enforcement have any authority to keep tabs on someone who is a person of interest? You know, the question being raised here as to why he wasn't watched better and how he was able to go missing.
Yeah, it goes back to those investigative steps. Investigators take very careful steps to gather evidence, and what they really don't want to do is jump to any conclusions and then end up being wrong. So they got to take these legal steps. They gotta go through where the evidence is taking them before they can consider somebody a suspect. If a person is just a person of interest, meaning again that they just may have information that is helpful to them, it's not the same as being a suspect. That means no probable cause exists. It means that they need to gather more evidence before they can actually detain them. So that's really the important piece, where the probable cause is at that moment in time about what they can do with anybody who's considered a person of interest or a suspect.
Tuesday morning, we learned from Northport Police this was an FBI-led criminal investigation. Then later in the day, we learned those remains were confirmed to be Gabby Petito's, with the initial determination of her manner of death to be homicide. Is there a possibility Brian Laundrie is considered a suspect in the eyes of law enforcement and we do not know?
It could very well be, because there's these investigative and legal steps that need to be taken. There's reasons why a person could be still considered a person of interest and not formally be named a suspect. The arrest warrant could be in process. The arrest warrant could be imminent. They could be discussing legal strategies or other investigative steps they need to take. So just because we haven't been told he's a suspect doesn't mean that he isn't in the eyes of the investigators at this time.
And to that point, too, you know, we saw on Friday law enforcement entering the Laundrie home. We didn't know at the time they were executing a search warrant until after the fact. I mean, could this be following suit?
It could very well be. So all information that we have at this time seems to be pointing to the fact that Mr. Laundrie is more than just a person of interest, and he's actually being looked at as a suspect. But again, since they haven't declared that yet and they haven't made contact with him, or so it seems, then we have to let them and the investigation unfold to see where the evidence takes them before that happens.
And we're also seeing, I mean, there's so many moving parts in this case, but 911 calls that are being released. What is the responsibility for dispatchers to relay information from those 911 calls to law enforcement? And then what does law enforcement in turn need to do once that information is relayed?
Right. It's a 911 dispatch's responsibility is to relay all the information that they have to law enforcement. That's really critical. And then police officers and law enforcement from there will attempt to do their best to ascertain what's really going on, depending on what the phone call said or what the information relayed was. But again, it kind of goes back to that point that if nobody presses charges, if nobody files a formal complaint, then law enforcement can be very limited as to what they can do at that moment in time.
Is there any other context you can add to this case to give us a little bit of a insight and understanding as to why things are happening the way they're happening now?
I think they're being very careful in their steps, and I think that's indicative of a very solid investigation. Just because we may want things to move faster because we're on the sidelines and we kind of are seeing where things are going, doesn't mean that they have to rush and get ahead of where the evidence is taking them. They're being very careful and precise to gather the evidence, take one step at a time. They're doing a search warrant. They're searching for Mr. Laundrie. All these things have a certain purpose behind them. So as the investigation goes on, I think that once they get to the point in which arrest warrants are issued, we're going to see that they did a pretty fantastic job of gathering solid evidence so that when it comes time to prosecution, they're successful in their efforts if that's where the investigation leads them.
And one last question for you. The country is watching this case, the rumors just swirling on the internet on every single platform. Is that helping or hurting this investigation from the law enforcement standpoint?
My personal thoughts on that are that rumors and people thinking that they know more than where the evidence is taking them is usually more hurtful and harmful than anything helpful. The only helpful part of that is people who may have been there or may have seen something. It's important that they step up and call and report what they've seen. But other than that, all the media attention and all the ways in which we are putting more pressure on investigators and what we think should be the next steps is not a good idea. I think we need to let the evidence dictate where the investigation takes them. I think in the end, we're going to all be seeing a very solid investigation that took place here.
Well, and thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. Just really valuable insight to have with your FBI background.
Thank you.